Greetings, comrades, and welcome to the Eastern Border. I've scraped this study off of the bottom of a vodka bottle for you, and it stinks of glorious and adulterated failure. We don't see proper heresies these days, but this one, this definitely counts as one. This whole story started when I was on a road trip to the border regions of Latvia with my Catholic friends, and then I discovered the text that I'm about to quote you in Vatnik News. See, I already feel like a blasphemer just by reading these texts, and I sincerely hope that everyone with a conservative mindset, those who at the very least claim to care about these so-called traditional Christian values and thus, for some reason, have chosen to support Russia, again, that must be some very accursed reason, will start to at least understand that doing so is supporting people who clearly have a vastly different idea about what Christianity actually is. After this one, you probably, if you haven't already, should go and listen to my 11th of July episode of this year, obviously. Russia as a religious experience. They come together, and they will make your head explode if taken together, because this is a nice little argumentation for that one. Hopefully your head will not explode literally, but I'd like to start with a thing that Vladimir Kvachkov, a buddy of Girkin's, wrote, and he's a notable buddy, because he's one of the founding members of the Club of Angry Patriots. He's often a guest in Maxim Kalashnikov's show too, but he's also the creator of their ideology, which they follow thoroughly and which is very much supported by most of these aggressive vatniks out there gathering help for the front on the Russian side and helping out Russian army in every way that they can. My biggest surprise was when I found out that it's actually supported by a bunch of people of conservative leanings, especially in the United States of America. So how about we take a look at what they actually say about the Christian Church and its history and what's going on there, and learn a bit more about this Vladimir Kvachkov himself. And here is the original letter that he posted on Telegram. This one is dated 26th of July, but he earlier begins it by mentioning the 16th of July, which is by the old calendar, which he continues to use profusely. On the 16th or the 26th of July of 1054, the Christian Church split. For 6 months prior to this, Cardinal Humbert and other delegates from Rome had been sitting in Constantinople, waiting for the Byzantines to give in and take the blame for the split, declaring their disobedience to papal authority and thereby bringing anathema upon themselves. However, the cardinal did not wait. Therefore, he was forced to publish the document given to him in Rome by Pope Leo IX upon his departure for Constantinople. It was a papal bull excommunicating Patriarch Michael Kerularios of Constantinople and all who followed his errors and unfounded claims. On that day, Patriarch Michael was celebrating the divine liturgy of the Cathedral of Saint Sophia. Cardinal Humbert arrived there with a delegation, did not hesitate to interrupt the divine service, entered the altar without permission, and placed the papal bull containing the anathema against the Byzantines on the throne. In response, the Patriarch excommunicated the Pope from the Church and the Council. The schism was complete. Rome broke away from the consular unity of Christ's Church, confirmed by 7 ecumenical councils, and ultimately turned into Judeo-Christianity, absolving the Jews of the sin of deicide and recognizing them as elder brothers at the Vatican Council. And there he adds his very special prayer to this, which I will try to read as clearly as I possibly can. This is just glorious. Quote, From the prayer of Vladimir Kvachkov, a warrior of Christ. He puts the Kvachkov in brackets, because, surnames did not exist at the time. Oh, this is a bit of insanity already. Pray to God, all saints who have shone forth in the Russian land and all saints of the Lord. Pray to the Lord in heaven, all Russian Orthodox and Soviet people who have given their souls for their brothers and laid down their lives for the faith and the fatherland, and together with us, pray to God for the preservation of the Christian faith and holy Russia on Russian soil and in our souls. In brackets, bow at the waist. Pray to the Lord for the restoration of the Russian Orthodox Empire and the throne for the future autocratic sovereign. Again in brackets, bow to the waist. And this one's all in all caps. Pray the Lord for the renaissance of Moscow, the third Rome on earth, for the establishment and confirmation in Russia and in the world of the truly one, holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, the Moscow Universal Orthodox Church of Christ. In brackets, yet again, bow at the waist. Pray to God for the preservation and salvation of the God-bearing triune people of Russia, by which he means Ukrainians and Belarusians as well, because he doesn't believe that they're actual ethnicities, And all Christians on earth, pray to God Now in brackets, cross sign with 2 fingers, bow to the ground. Pray to God. Then again in brackets, cross sign with 3 fingers, bow to the ground. 3 fingers must be extra important. And that's not the only prayer that he posts around. Here's another one, a bit more aggressive in his speech. From the private prayer of Vladimir, in brackets again, Kvachkov, a warrior of Christ. Glory to you, Holy Reverend Father Seraphim. Glory to you, miracle worker Sarov. Pray to God with us. Holy Father Seraphim, the wonder worker, and help us to perform the joyful miracle of spiritual awakening and spiritual transformation of the Russian peoples, the miracle of the Christian revival of Russia. Help us, Reverend Seraphim, each and every one of us, to find God's truth within ourselves and to go to war with it, with the accursed West, especially the Anglo-Saxons, to the last war on Russian soil for the faith, the true Tsar and the Orthodox state as you prophesied. Pray to God, Father Seraphim, that the Lord may spare the Russian army from the grave sin of using weapons against its own people. Again, this calls back to the triune situation there. But that he may turn our army at the decisive moment against traitors to the state and foreign invaders, especially the Americans. Pray to God for us, holy venerable Seraphim of Sarov, wonder worker, and help us to accomplish the Russian miracle for the glory of Lord and the destruction of the United States of America. Then kneel with your hands crossed on your chest. Bless venerable Seraphim of Sarov, the Russian Orthodox army, and me, Vladimir the warrior, with my comrades as we prepare for war against the West, for the faith and the fatherland, for the salvation of the Orthodox soul of the Russian people. Yeah, I mean, for these guys, these traditional values, don't you think, mean slightly different matters than to literally every other Christian on this planet Earth? But then again, I have to explain a bit more about this Vladimir Kvachkov. He's one interesting puppy. See, his full name is Vladimir Vasilyevich Kvachkov. His supporters, all of whom, by the way, are Igor Girkin's buddies from the Club of Angry Patriots, well, they will tell you that he's a public and political figure. That's more like calling a rabid dog a canine outreach specialist. So let's dissect this masterpiece of mediocrity. The story starts, as these tragedies often do, with promise. Our boy Vova graduates from military schools with honors, medals, and the whole 9 yards. A silver medal from Suvorov School in 1966. Silver. See, the pattern starts early. Always the bridesmaid, never the bride. He's a certified box-ticking honor roll machine. The system loved him. It built him up, patted his head, and told him he was a very special boy. He got sent to all the fun places: Afghanistan, Azerbaijan, Tajikistan, Chechnya. He was the GRU's go-to guy for wandering around in conflicts with the Soviet Union and then Russia were spectacularly failing to win. Commander here, chief of staff there. He collected combat experience like it was a set of Magic the Gathering cards, but the one he never found was decisive victory. He was a highly decorated participant in a series of geopolitical dumpster fires, to be honest. His career is a travelogue of quagmires, missteps, and, well, possibly getting drunk more than these people who were liquidating the consequences of Chernobyl. So what does a man with a resume full of marriage decline do? He gets a brilliant idea, a world-changing, paradigm-shifting epiphany. He decides the GRU Spetsnaz needs to be its own special branch of the military. He marches into the halls of power, chest puffed up, and presents his grand theory, and quite expectedly, they fired him. You have to expect the sheer density of that move. It's like inventing a new flavor of ice cream as your first move is to throw it in the CEO's face. So, in 1998, this tactical titan gets dismissed from the reserve. Undeterred, he locks himself away in the Center for Military and Strategic Studies, the Army's official think tank for guys they don't know what else to do with. There, he scribbles down one of his masterpieces, a doctoral dissertation classified as secret. A secret, apparently, that was so profound, so earth-shattering, its main effect was getting him booted from one thing he was actually supposedly good at. And here, this is where the story goes from tragic to just plain hilarious. In 2005, our strategic mastermind was accused of trying to assassinate Anatoly Chubais, the human personification of a literal spreadsheet, who was, well, leader of the central bank at the time. This should have been a cakewalk for a Spetsnaz legend, right? A simple special operation. Yeah, he failed spectacularly. He failed so badly that a jury literally could not believe he was competent enough to have organized it. Let that sink in. The court looked at this decorated GRU colonel, this theorist of special operations, and effectively ruled, nah, this guy's too much of a clown to have pulled this off. He was acquitted not on lack of evidence, but on a perceived surplus of ineptitude. That's not a legal victory, that's a divine roast. The Supreme Court of Russia confirmed that the entire Russian legal system gave him a gold-plated, officially notarized certificate of incompetence, but that did not stop him one bit. So what does a man do after being publicly humiliated and declared too clumsy to be a criminal? If you're Vladimir Klitschko, you double down. The day after his final acquittal, December 24th, 2010, he's arrested again. The charge? Preparing an armed uprising. From his living room, presumably. This man who couldn't organize the hit on one bureaucrat decided to level up and try to overthrow the entire Russian Federation. The state, having learned its lesson at this point, well, for once, to be honest, decided to level up and, they didn't even bother with juries this time. They just threw him in a strict regime colony for 8 years to think about what he's done. He even managed to catch another charge in prison for incitement to hatred, which is just, the sad and bitter cherry on top of his failure ice cream cake. This is just crazy. So, he spent in total 11 years in prison. And after a glorious 11 years in the slammer, what did our hero learn? Has he learned humility? Subtlety? Nope. He emerges blinking into the light with a brand new home-brewed ideology. Russian Christian socialism. Yes, it sounds exactly as stupid as it actually is. And, this is something like you would come up with after eating fermented bread for a decade, but we'll get to that one later. Currently, he's the chairman of the All-Russian Officers' Assembly, which, let me admit, sounds pretty much like a comedy for men who still think the sun revolves around a red star in the Soviet flag or something. He's got 2 orders of courage and a chest full of medals, participation trophies for a lifetime of aiming for the stars and hitting his own feet. So there you have it, Vladimir Klitschko, a man whose greatest skill is apparently failing upwards, a living monument to the idea that if you are confident enough in your own delusions, someone, somewhere will eventually give you a medal for it and build a fan club, and call you for all sorts of interviews, because this guy appears in literally every other show Maxim Kalashnikov puts out, and Maxim Kalashnikov, as you might know, already is crazy enough to call himself both a futurologist and a historian, while being incompetent at both of these things. But now we get to the actually interesting parts, the good ones. About that Russian Christian socialism. You see, our glorious hero, Klitschko, expressed his ideas in a written format. I really shit you not here. He spent 2 weeks locked up in a monastery to write this. And this monastery, where he avoided every worldly desire, wasn't a regular one either. It was a women's monastery until January 2018, when an aggressive group of Orthodox zealots threw out the inhabiting nuns because they did not believe in Russia enough, and, took over. Klitschko, after he left being locked in the prison, didn't want to waste any opportunity to be a complete heretical imbecile, and he arrived and swore fealty, literally, to these nun-hating assholes. While there, his supporters, some of the Wagner group and some from the infamous shit-eating assholes that are the Deshergar Rusich neo-Nazis, brought him food so that he could produce his magnum opus, this one not being secret like his totally legitimate and absolutely awesome doctoral dissertation, which he definitely earned truly. And, this one succeeded in greatness as much as Tommy Wiseau did while producing The Room. It's fitting that in such a place like this one, where actual nuns had been thrown out and the whole mess had been pre-desecrated for Klitschko's delusions, the manifesto of the Russian world was spawned. I wouldn't want to state that it was created. Such insanity, and very popular insanity at that, it's almost sold out, can only be produced similarly to how aliens spawn in Ridley Scott movies. And that thing, by the way, it's not cheap either. On Ozone, the Russian book site, this book, if I dare to call it so, it's more like something that, 1,000 monkeys could type with a typewriter in an infinite universe. No, actually, I wouldn't want to insult these 1,000 monkeys, to be honest. It's just something purely evil. It costs ridiculous amounts of money. 15,000 rubles, which is 162 euros at this point. And that, you wouldn't believe me, that's with a discount. It was 216 euros and 53 euro cents before that. 20,000 rubles. And they have just one physical book remaining. Of course, I just, stole it from Rutracker, but it is what it is. I'm not paying these assholes 162 euros. It's just hilarious. You really have to conclude that this man truly believes that he has written some sort of a prophetic book of proper Russian glory. It's a prime example, really, why I consider all of the vatniks to have basically 3 brain cells together among them, and that's at best. So, basically, now we get to the review of the book, because, again, I don't want to get into the full extent of his whole Vatnik manifesto After all, I have translated that, but it will hurt you physically and melt your brains without any given beneficial side effects. But, well, then again, this whole thing might melt your brain as such. But there's a book review about this, which sort of puts the ideas in some sort of perspective here until I figure out what to do with the main text itself. See, Wova's buddies, his fellow travelers in the land of make-believe in the Russian officers' assembly, well, they got their hands on this manifesto, and their task was to praise their messiah's genius without giving off any hints that his entire premise is pants-on-head insane, but instead that it's a divinely inspired work, rivaling that of the Bible. Yeah, it's one huge mess where you could put them all in the insane asylum, and probably that wouldn't make much of a difference since they already all are in this Russian officers' assembly anyways. It all starts beautifully. The goal, they say, isn't just to unite Orthodox officers. No, that's not enough. They need to unite everyone. Non-religious people, other faiths, you name it, under one big tent. Even Kvachkov's own sycophants immediately see the problem. In a stunning moment of clarity, they write, so if it's Christian, then Islam is excluded? The same applies to atheism. Such a name for the ideology divides the united people of Russia into Christians and everyone else. But this is only one part where they try to criticize something that is said in this book, just to show that, they are actually not the same thing, but can speak critically. They don't really, but it's just an illusion. All in all, what he tries to do here is like trying to unite all animal lovers under a banner called the Glorious Dog Worshippers Front. They spend the rest of their review tripping over themselves trying to fix this catastrophic branding failure. What unites them, they meekly suggest, is simply Russian socialism. Well, too late, you bastards. The whole of the crazy is already out of the bag, but not like you'll ever really notice, to be honest. This is where their collective brain really starts to leak out of their ears. They agree with Vlova that the Stalinist era of socialism in Russia can serve as a prototype for the future of Russia. Yeah, the same thing. The whole Stalinist socialism is the Russian Christian socialism. And you read that right. The prototype of the era of purges, gulags, and state-enforced atheism. Good start, guys. You're on it. But wait, they also agree that the USSR collapsed because of its atheistic, godless essence, which is just amazing. So let's get this straight. The prototype for their new society is the thing that they also claim failed because of its fundamental nature. As you might understand, this really isn't an ideology, it's a logical car crash. They want to rebuild the machine that exploded, but this time they'll paint a crucifix on the engine and pray it doesn't blow up again. They twist themselves into pretzels trying to reconcile this. They quote the Stalinist constitution, separating church and state. They condemn the USSR for being godless. They praise Christ's teachings and then hold up as their hero a man who blew up churches and shot priests. It's a schizophrenic word salad, a desperate attempt to create a chimera, a God-fearing, Orthodox Christian, atheistic Stalinist state. Good luck with that, guys, but I don't know what you're going to do, but this offends pretty much everyone. Again, back in one of my earlier episodes, I don't remember which one, but it was earlier this year, I quoted another one of his adepts of this whole ideology, who's just by happenstance the leading expert on tactical medicine giving lectures to the Russian soldiers online, Yuri Yevich, who legitimately considers everyone in Europe is making drugs out of baby blood. He made sort of a prayer in the similar vein of this Kvachkov guy about how Stalin must be worshipped because he definitely is in heaven. This goes all together with their nice little belief that at the end of the World War II, they're celebrating, well, just the Russian Empire at its largest extent, acquired by military glory. By Stalin, no less, which is just amazing. But, that's just par for the course. Because, well, when these geniuses aren't too busy contradicting themselves, they're making demands. And what demands they are. It's a wish list written on a cocktail napkin during a particularly bad acid trip. Well, they say, quote, nationalize all banks and transfer them to the jurisdiction of the state. Because obviously state-run economies worked out so well last time. It's a bold strategy. Well, let's see if it pays off for them. Increase the population to 1 billion by the end of the 21st century. And how exactly? How? To 1 billion? I'm not joking here. They would need to annex China for that, I presume, and even that might be not enough since, well, they're dying off in wars. It's just crazy. Are they going to put something in the water? Are they going to start, breeding Russians like little puppies? This isn't a policy. This is a sci-fi villain's fantasy created in some sort of doom villain's secret lair. And then they write the following, quote, "We, Russians, have the primary responsibility for preserving the white population in Europe and the white race throughout our planet." You really have to admire the sheer audacity of these idiots. A handful of aging men in their 60s and 70s who can't even agree on a name for their own ideology are going to save an entire race on a continent that wants nothing to do with them. Even Putin and his government, which they, by the way, deem as satanic, although they agreed with him in the beginning and named him a czar, but, that's where my episode 299 and 300, again, of July comes in and explains this much better. Well, they glorify the great czar, who also espouses this very ideology, but, these guys they're now being put in prison. This is just purely amazing. It's like hearing the captain of the Titanic offer to teach you guys some swimming lessons. But the, absolute peak of this mountain of stupid comes in for their very weird takes on science. Kvachkov has apparently decided that science itself is broken. The fix? Well, the fix is the axiom of God, without which no general scientific theory can be created. Now, if they would understand something about this, then this would be kind of interesting and funny, but I have seen Russian Orthodox priests recently, ending their masses by ringing bells and stating that this will stop the evil Anglo-Saxon propaganda and, will also make drones shut down, because it's only the special bell ring can stop the drones, even those who are on the optic fiber cables. Amazeballs. And his fan club, they nod along sagely. They declare that we must eliminate the false opposition between science and religion to unite them into a single whole. Their proof is that non-religious scientists are ignorant while religion provides true knowledge. This from a group trying to create a fundamentally sound scientific concept, as they claim themselves, for the ideology. They want to base their future on science while simultaneously declaring that science is just a form of knowing God. I mean, you could argue that, but coming from these guys who know neither science nor God, I can't really believe anything that they'd recommend would go beyond the event horizon of an intellectual black hole. And really speaking, these guys, and even their attitudes towards God is, I don't know, they're looking now for a true czar, because, this Putin guy, apparently not good enough, although Putin himself truly believes that he is the high king of this mountain built from a bunch of idiocy going around, and at this point, tons and tons of dead bodies.
Hey everyone! Annette here. Thanks for listening to another episode of The Eastern Border. This show is possible thanks to your support. So if you like what you hear, head over to patreon.com/The Eastern Border and help us keep it going. Even small contributions make a difference. And don't forget, there's also a Discord. If you want to join the community, chat with Kristaps, share memes, or just learn more about history, come hang out. You'll find the link in the show notes. Thanks again, and now, back to the episode.
Kvachkov's manifesto and his buddy's review, they're not a political program. They're the last sputtering gasps of a dying worldview, a cry for help from men so lost in their own fantasies they can't see the walls of the asylum. They're aging revolutionaries. They're living fossils, babbling about Stalin and Jesus to an audience of vatnik bloggers, true believers in the cause of Russian imperialism, and veterans of the special military operation. This failed attempt at glorious imperialism, waiting for their prosthetic limbs in a rundown hospital where neither the medical staff nor their own government gives a damn about them. They also read this to these guys stuck in the trenches, fighting for some ideal or another, hoping that Putin might actually be this promised Jesus that builds them this second kingdom on earth and kills all the United States people because, glorious Russian Empire apparently is this magnificent promised land. But the ride isn't over. You thought we'd reached the bottom of the barrel with Kvachkov's Stalin Jesus power smoothie. You fools. Children. We're about to punch through the bottom of the barrel and start digging deeper, because every failed prophet needs a patron saint. And oh boy, Vovochka, both of them to be honest, has decided to hitch his rotting wagon to a star. And this might surprise you, but this is Alexander Solzhenitsyn. See, Kvachkov is not just a fan, he's a full-blown apostle. This is an inspiration, it's a hostage situation. Kvachkov has strapped Solzhenitsyn's reputation to his chest like a suicide vest and is threatening to pull the pin. It's so insane that I'll just read this one in full because, yes, Solzhenitsyn was an arch-reactionary who argued that the Soviet rule suppressed traditional Russian and Ukrainian culture, who called for the creation of a united Slavic state encompassing Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, and who was a fierce opponent of Ukrainian independence. It is well documented that his negative views on Ukrainian independence became ever more radical over the years. And also, he was praising Putin in his latter years when he returned back to Russia, seeing him as this divinely inspired leader. Again, I mentioned this in Russia as a religion episode. But here's what Kvachkov has to say about him. Because, well, this is all sorts of crazy, and I can't even give you much comments here, besides, well, the fact that this goes well in with all their myths, except that at this point, they truly hope that, someone else might come after Putin. And this guy, oh boy, this guy then will be the true glorious Tsar on everything. So let's get into this, shall we? Alexander Isayevich Solzhenitsyn, 11th of December 1918, 3rd of August 2008, was a Russian thinker, writer, publicist, and social and political activist. They like their political activists there, the vatniks. He was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1970 for the moral force with which he has pursued the tradition of Russian literature. This just makes me think that maybe we should stop giving out Nobel Prizes to everyone out there and just study them before we do. After all, especially this goes for the Nobel Peace Prize, for which even Hitler was nominated for. But Kvachkov continues. His struggle is best summed up in the famous words of another dissident, Zinoviev. Quote, "They aimed at communism but ended up with Russia. However, unlike the atheist Alexander Alexandrovich Zinoviev, who could not imagine a path for Russia's further development after the Soviet Union, Alexander Isayevich Solzhenitsyn saw a way out of the national impasse of 1993 in return to the Orthodox faith as the state ideology of the future Russia. In terms of his social and political beliefs, Solzhenitsyn, and this, by the way, is completely true, which is why I'm not even mocking this part as previous sections, but this really is true. He was a Russian Orthodox nationalist and lived his entire life in accordance with his Christian consciousness." And then comes the line that tells you everything you need to know about the sanity of Kvachkov, who writes this stuff, and from the rest of the vatniks. "All other speculations about him are from the devil." But then Kvachkov adds, "I must admit that given the massive disinformation campaign surrounding the name of Solzhenitsyn during the communist era in the Soviet Union, I had doubts about whether it was appropriate for me to take on this case now. Would I, a former Soviet colonel and staunch communist, a Special Forces Brigade commander in the GRU who belonged to the party nomenclature of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, who was forced to convert to Christianity at the age of 44, find myself suddenly among Muslims, former Soviet officers and other atheist citizens, in Chirchik, Tashkent region in 1992, and only then, after 30 years of becoming a churchgoer, to correctly assess and shed light on the personality of this great Russian Orthodox man. However, time is running out. The Russian people who formed the Russian state have once again reached a historic crossroads, as they did in 1991 to 1993. We will soon have to make fateful decisions not only for ourselves, the people living today, but also determine the path of our children, grandchildren, and future generations. Therefore, I have decided to publicly express my opinion on some of Solzhenitsyn's thoughts. You can judge for yourselves what has come of it. And I will, because what has come of it is literally, less worth than a pile of rotten oranges thrown in a huge mess by a drunk orangutan who's also juggling shotguns at the same time. And if that sounds insane, that's because, it legitimately is. But here Kvachkov goes on with this whole mess. It is just utterly crazy from this point on, but you should be used to this at this moment. Quote, "As a rule, Solzhenitsyn is regarded primarily as a writer and a Nobel Prize winner for literature and as a Soviet dissident, although he himself categorically denied the latter." That, by the way, is a true statement by Kvachkov here. "From this point of view, Alexander Isayevich is a Russian Orthodox Christian nationalist and a monarchist," which already is a bit crazy. "In these guises, our beliefs coincide almost completely, including his attitude towards the Jewish question, because anti-Semitism always strikes its head over there. The value of the two-volume monograph, The 200 Years Together, 1795, 1995, for the Russian world has been implicitly and repeatedly confirmed by Jews themselves, who, when mentioning this book, immediately reminded me that after its publication, Solzhenitsyn was recognized in their circles as unacceptable." And then Kvachkov, of course, mentions that, "God bless you for this research, Alexander Isayevich." Oh boy. And then Klitschko says that his fundamental disagreement with Solzhenitsyn lies in his attitude towards socialism, or more precisely, towards the socialist method of running the national economy, which he then criticizes Solzhenitsyn, stating that, quote, he mistakenly does not separate from the communist utopia itself. Then Klitschko continues, it is noteworthy that his rejection of communism was not at all linear. Even in the lower grades, he was ridiculed for wearing a cross, refusing to join the pioneers, and was even reprimanded for attending church. However, under the influence of school, he embraced communist ideology and joined the Komsomol in 1936. At the front, Solzhenitsyn became critical of Stalin for distorting Leninism. In letters, and by the way, that was in brackets, in letters to his old friend Vitkevich, he spoke abusively about the Soviet leader, compared Stalin's rule to serfdom, which was actually pretty much worse than serfdom, but that's just my obscene opinion here, and spoke of creating an organization after the war to restore the so-called Leninist norms. The letters aroused the suspicion of the military censors. On 9th of February 1945, Solzhenitsyn was arrested at the regiment headquarters, stripped of his military rank of captain and his orders of the Order of the Patriotic War and the Order of the Red Star, and sent to Moscow. As a result, Solzhenitsyn was sentenced in absentia by a special council to 8 years in a labor camp and permanent exile after serving his sentence. In prison, Solzhenitsyn became a completely disillusioned with Marxism. After his release, he was sent into exile for life to a settlement in South Kazakhstan. He worked as a mathematics and physics teacher in grades 8 to 10 at a local secondary school. In June 1956, by a decision of the Supreme Court of the USSR, Solzhenitsyn was initially released without rehabilitation, quote, due to the absence of a criminal offense in his actions, end quote. But in February 1957, by a decision of the military collegium of the Supreme Court of the USSR, Solzhenitsyn was fully rehabilitated. And, here, Klitschko notes that this concludes the Marxist-Leninist section of Alexander Isaevich's ideological journey. And I wish that would conclude Klitschko's journey as well, but, we can't really expect this old man to just silently put a gun to his head and pull the trigger, although that would be a blessing for all of humanity, to be honest. But let's continue on, because at this point, Klitschko really does stick to the facts. Skipping over his confrontation with the Communist Party and the Soviet authorities, we will now proceed to an analysis of his Orthodox Christian and patriotic ideology. And again, this letter is fully true, and this is why I can quote this guy. On September the 5th, 1973, A.I. Solzhenitsyn sent a letter to the leadership of the Soviet Union entitled A Letter to the Leaders of the Soviet Union, in which he called for the abandonment of communist ideology and the first steps towards transforming the internationally oriented USSR into a Russian nation-state. A brief overview of the socio-political situation in which this work appeared was this, according to Klitschko, obviously. The mid-70s marked the peak of the trajectory of the state ballistic missile known as the USSR. It was the height of its global power. Solzhenitsyn's genius lies in the fact that it was at his peak, recalling Zinoviev's expression, on the gaping heights of socialism, which is totally the part of stagnation, but, let's not reality get involved with this stuff. The reality should not mix with alcoholical wonders of Klitschko's head written down in a monastery which has been desecrated previously. But Alexander Isaevich saw the inevitability of the demise of the Soviet atheistic state. And there he quotes Solzhenitsyn, quote, this letter was born and developed from a single thought: how to avoid the national catastrophe that threatens us. What did the great Russian writer see then? Klitschko asks. And I will answer, probably the bottom of an empty vodka bottle, but, doesn't matter at this point. But here Klitschko finally starts to summarize why he praises Solzhenitsyn so much. And again, you should really listen to this Russia viewed from a religious angle episode, because, again, he really supported this idea of this religious czar and, is responsible for planting that into Putin's head, because Putin really likes to be praised. But Klitschko also praises this guy and now believes that Putin has strayed from the true path of being this Basileus, this Byzantine ruler of this neo-Orthodox, weird, socialist, Stalinist empire of weirdness that is going on at this point. Klitschko comments thusly, quote, after 1975, the Soviet Union entered a downward trajectory. The main reason was the Soviet society, now hold on to your pants, dear comrades, had lost faith in the idea of building communism. The fuel in the form of material resources was still there, but there was no faith. No catalyst to create the energy and momentum needed to drive society forward. And faith in the possibility of building a just state on earth disappeared. This appeared with the passing of the last religious and spiritual generation born around the 1900s. This first generation of the 20th century was overwhelmingly Orthodox, and in 1925 passed on Christian spiritual values to the first Soviet generation through the institution of the family. I don't know how this tracks, but this is the madness that you should probably expect after this whole manifesto nonsense. It was this fusion of the historical Orthodox faith of the Russian people with the social justice of socialism. Don't mind this. This has nothing to do with the social justice of the western part of the left-leaning political spectrum. It's something totally different. But he says, Kvachkov says here that, oh God, this brought us victory in the Great Patriotic War. However, from the 1950 onwards, the next generation began to emerge, raised exclusively on family and state atheistic principles. By 1975, the spiritual connection between the Russian people and God was severed, and the engines of the Soviet Union gradually came to a halt. Our intelligentsia, wrote Solzhenitsyn, is unanimous in its vision of the desired future of our country. And there he puts in brackets, the broadest freedoms. But it is also unanimous in its complete inaction for this future. Everyone is spellbound, waiting to see if something will happen by itself. No, it will not happen. This means completely abandoning any hope for a peaceful evolution of our country. And there Kvachkov, by the way, added an emphasis here by putting them all in all caps. And Alexander Isayevich himself took it upon himself to develop proposals for the country's leadership on practical steps to depart from the path that threatened the destruction of the Soviet Union. Here, although letters to the leaders of the Soviet Union consist of 7 massive parts, Kvachkov only provides brief quotes from some of them, and, well, thanks Kvachkov, because otherwise I would go insane, because I have now read all of this manifesto, and if I would have to read Solzhenitsyn's famous other texts, besides the fact that Gulag Archipelago was banned, well, yeah, he was pretty much loved by Putin's regime. Here's the whole point of what he believes and what also Putin believes. They just differ on the fact that Putin thinks he's this glorious elected czar, while Kvachkov and other vatniks from the Girkin's club, and let me remind you, they create aggressive militias all throughout the country, what they truly believe in, and how this really fits in with all this situation, with how people in the West, how conservative people in the West view religion and everything, because this comes out of sheer passion for the ideals of glorious mega Russian Empire, which then is the promised land on earth. So, 7 main theses of this final work of Solzhenitsyn. 1. The West is on its knees. The catastrophic weakening of the Western world and of Western civilization as a whole is mainly the result of a historical, physiological, psychological, and moral crisis of the entire culture and worldview that began in the Renaissance. 2. War with China. This dynamic pressure from a billion-strong China on our still undeveloped Siberian lands on the whole of Siberia will increase with the growth of the general overpopulation of the earth. Overpopulation that is not coming because we will stabilize at around 10 to 15 billion, but that's a different question. 3. The impasse of civilization. All endless progress has turned out to be a mad, tense, ill-considered rush by humanity into a dead end. 4. The Russian Northeast. The greatest wealth of nations today is land. Land is space for settlement. Land is the volume of the biosphere. Yeah, I wonder if Solzhenitsyn had actually read this stuff, but this really looks a bit of like a Lebensraum thing. And there, the point 5, which is why I don't understand why he supports the war so much, but it's all about internal, not external development. Literally, just the 5th point in Kvachkov states here. But it makes no sense, because if Russia wanted to develop internally, they have all the land in the world to do so. 6. Ideology. Marxism is striking in its economic mechanistic crudeness in its attempts to explain the most subtle human being and even the more complex combination of millions of people, society. 7. And how could this be possible? I will remind you that the councils that gave our system its name do not depend in any way on ideology, whether it existed or not, but necessarily presuppose the broadest counsel of all those who labor. So, yeah, he considers everyone to be just damned and all the progress evil. Kvachkov himself hates the Anglo-Saxons completely. In essence, and this Kvachkov adds, finally, this is just amazing thing. In essence, this was a proposal to transform the atheistic Communist Party-led Soviet Union into a Russian Orthodox Soviet socialist state. And by the way, this letter is available online, comrades. It is insane and crazy, and can be united only by the fact that they also believe that, Anglo-Saxons and Protestantism in general has been developed by the devil and is the tool of the Antichrist. It is just amazing. And they managed to hate everyone. Protestants, Catholics, Jews, Muslims, everyone else, because the only true form of traditional values in their Christianity is basically this idea of, a Tsar-led, somehow monarchistic, Stalinist, Orthodox Christian governmental monarchy state where everyone's basically somewhat stormed off into their little and serve villages, I presume. Oh boy, but now we've done with the quotes, and it's not going to get any easier. Because, for one, I wouldn't blame you if you would have run off screaming by now, but you've sat through the tragicomedy of Vov the Klotz, the intellectual dumpster fire, and his fan club, and the ghost of Solzhenitsyn. But, you might think you've seen the bottom here, but that's also adorable. Welcome to the final chapter, comrades. Welcome to the sewer pipe at the end of the line. We've done with the man himself, now we get to meet his acolytes too. And all these other ideas, which are just espoused in this whole sphere of these guys who produce, the main ideological perspective of these soldiers who are not there just for the money, but for everything, and for whom actually Putin, believes in these whole values. Although he despises these guys because they are kind of his competition in who the true Tsar is, since Kvachkov and his cronies doesn't really believe in the fact that Putin would be the rightful Tsar, but that's the really only difference, truly. See, this happens when Kvachkov's brainworms escape quarantine and infect others. I give you a text from one Igor Druj, a true believer. This is written as a political text, but actually it's a paranoid diary scrawled in crayon and bodily fluids, and don't ask me which ones, mostly all of them, together with a huge dose of angry drugs. Very angry drugs. And it manages the impossible feat of offending every single person on God's green earth. Igor Druj here kicks off his magnum opus with a headline that screams, "I haven't taken my meds lately." Quote, "A new provocation by the leadership of the so-called Israel aimed at preparing for the restoration of the Third Temple has taken place." From there we are dragged headfirst into a fever dream. It's got everything. Talmudists storming mosques, the Antichrist, evil numerology based on the lunar calendar, a global plot for world domination. It's an ideological turducken of hate. Anti-Semitism stuffed inside Islamophobia, stuffed inside the deranged Christian end times LARP, which is going to be caused by the Anglo-Saxon Protestants. It's the QAnon of the Borscht Belt, and it's here to make you dumber. The genius of this text is its breathtaking efficiency. In just a few paragraphs, Igor Druj manages to spit in the face of the entire human race. Let's do a roll call of the offended. First of all, he manages to insult the Jews. This one's easy. It's a paint-by-numbers anti-Semitic fantasy. You've got your sinister Talmudists and their secret numerology. You've got Prime Minister Netanyahu personally paving the way for the Antichrist. They're not practicing their religion, they're executing a global conspiracy. It's the protocols of the Elders of Zion with a fresh coat of paint, because they're now building this third temple, and I won't even read this stuff, because then I will be just banned out completely. But this is going to be great when, with all the quotes. Then he offends the Muslims. Druj pretends to be on their side, defending the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which they were supposed to build in one corner of this restored third temple, but it's the most condescending defense imaginable. He dismisses Turkey's official protests as worthless because Ankara is, quote, de facto helping Tel Aviv. He treats the actual real-world political struggle over a holy site as nothing more than set dressing for his apocalyptic Christian fanfiction. The message is clear. Your holy places and political struggles only matter as props in my study. And by the way, get out of Russia, you bastards. Oh yeah, he manages to hate Muslims here as well because, they also, don't exactly deserve to live in this God's chosen Russian mega empire, and they won't let them go either because, they conquered the Muslims and now they just, keep them there. And then, there comes the Christians, especially the Western Christians here. Because you thought you were safe? Wrong. Again, he's taken the rich, complex, and varied field of Christian eschatology and boiled it down to a cheap political thriller. In his world, all Western Christians, especially the Anglo-Saxon Protestant bastards, as he calls them, and thankfully he adds them together with the Catholics, because to these guys, everyone is Catholic, and Protestant Reformation is just another heresy invented by the foul Catholic scumbags, right? They're all just, sitting around, all of us here, decoding Jewish calendars, which is a vile, evil sin, because we should use the previous one, which Kvachkov also uses in his own letters, and, waiting for the Antichrist like it's the series finale of the TV show. He basically makes everyone in the West who claims to be a Christian sound like a fringe internet cult written by Alex Jones and calls us all the Antichrist. And then, he offends literally everyone else with a functioning brain. He calls the globalist United Nations just a pawn. An international law? an inconvenience that is there to stifle Russia. All human politics, history, and diplomacy are irrelevant. The only thing that matters is Igor's mystical interpretation of events. He has achieved a level of self-importance so pure, it's almost beautiful in a very twisted kind of way where it's dark and grim, and how the guy in the Saw movies would view these things. He yells at literally everything about this third temple and everything. Talmudists and everything, because they want to desecrate the true Christian temple because of numerology and everything, and this just fits in because it's shared and supported by Kochkov. And here, at the fetid end of it all, we find our way back to Kochkov. This paranoid rant isn't a bug, it's a feature. This is what they think. This is the glorious utopia promised by the Russian Christian socialism. This is the endgame. All of his half-baked theories, his hatreds, his delusions of grandeur, they all lead here. To a sweaty, wild-eyed conspiracy theory about the Antichrist, who's definitely American. His movement isn't about restoring Russia or saving the white race, it's about seeing Jewish plots behind every corner and waiting for the end of the world. Kochkov hasn't built a political front, he's trying to, but he's built a doomsday cult for fired colonels. And the sad part is that the only difference between him and what Putin believes is about who deserves to be the Tsar. So there you have it. From a failed assassin to a failed ideologue to a failed historian, ending with a follower who has failed at basic sanity and with a failed movement and a failed state with a failed president. This is just stupid. This whole movement and this whole Russian state is... they're living something that's basically nothing but a collection of ghosts howling in a forgotten corner of the internet. Not a monument of failure, a cautionary tale written in the language of madness, and this is just how we carry on with our days here. You have to view Russia as a religion, as I mentioned in that episode, which I highly recommend that you give a check to, because the more you listen to this, the more you study this, the more you understand that they are all the most fanatical people ever, and the fact that there are some people who claim to be conservatives on supporting these traditional Christian values, that there's someone like this who supports them, that alone is just sheer insanity. And at the same time, like I said, the only thing that comes out of all this situation is the fact that Putin is now jailing them, but not because he would disagree with them fundamentally. No. Because they disagree about who the Tsar is. At the same time, well, we have seen more and more of these true supporters, true believers being jailed. And here, on the last segment of the show, I'm going to read you something which I found surprising because, well, we have some sort of new South American soap opera happening with Z-Logger 13th, which sort of shows how things are turning out because Putin wants to be the lone Tsar out there. And now, apparently, he's now dealing, after other people, with the Z-Logger 13th. Let's just say that this is going to be my goodbye to all of you here because in my last funny segment, I want to read you at least this part to get off of this weird religious part because, oh boy, my head already hurts and it was massively painful to make this episode. But yeah, this is what the 13th, the guy that swears a lot and is a general asshole and really deserves a place in prison, this is what he wrote, quote, "If I disappear from communication, don't be surprised, it just happened. For now, I'm in shock. There are armed people around my house right now looking for me. I managed to get away. What's going on? Who knows?" That's the 13th. And then, well, the next one was a weird thing from his admins. "Friends, my inbox is flooded with questions about Yegor." That's the 13th guy. "As soon as I can, I will provide you with all the information. Victory will be ours. Remember that and never forget." That's the admin of this group. And here, comment from another vatnik Kirill Kachkur, who sort of explains why these guys managed to be following the same ideology that Putin does. And again, that episode, Russia as a religion, check that one out. That'll explain everything that you need to know. But this is why, what's happening to these people right now, while they are still being active and supporting this, because, well, they believe that the great betrayal of Russia is coming, and they're hostile to everything inside there, and seeing as Kvechkov's movement, together with everyone else who supports this manifesto, seeing as they're building active militias, it's not going to be fun for Russia. Again, it all ties together with all my episodes I've made previously in this month and the last one. But as the last part of this episode, here is Kirill Kachur, another vatnik who comments on the 13th. I just might want to mention him because he's been a lot on my show. And also that with all these people, what's going to happen to them because of this fact that they don't believe that Putin is the rightful Tsar. Quote, "Against the backdrop of the approaching deal, a purge of the information field is underway, namely of uncontrolled military bloggers and persons from the military environment who are in the public eye. Thus, late in the evening of 5th of August, participant 13th stopped posting, having reported the day before that armed men had come to him and were looking for him. Instead, his administrator, who goes by the nickname Kinder, is now writing for him. 13th's position was significantly revised after his arrest last autumn, but even after that, he occasionally spoke harshly about the ongoing lawlessness, including very recently about Trump himself, which is not in the Kremlin's interest at the moment. One of the former high-ranking officials of the Donetsk People's Republic Ministry of Defense and a former close associate of Igor Girkin, Pavel Gubarev, has also not posted anything for almost 10 days. For a long time, he wrote the truth about the course of the special military operation, which was unpleasant for the Kremlin, and also publicly asked uncomfortable questions to the commander of the Akhmat battalion, Aptielodinov, whom I still think is gonna declare Chechen's independence, by the way. The Rusich Special Forces Group, which has been successfully carrying out combat missions in Donbass since 2014, has repeatedly asked uncomfortable but objective questions about the progress of the special military operation, but has so far not commented on the upcoming deal, which is in fact Russia's treacherous surrender. I will not even mention the purge of the Wagner network, the murders of Russian heroes Yevgeny Prigozhin and Dmitry Utkin, or the arrests of Igor Girkin and Combat General Ivan Popov on trumped-up criminal charges. P.S. I have been writing about this outcome for a long time, that all those who are inconvenient will be purged through imprisonment, labeling the Telegram administration and other means. Moreover, those who are inconvenient for the Kremlin are those who support victory in the special military operation, not the liberal circle, because no one in the Kremlin is afraid of the liberal circle, but they are more afraid of people with weapons and a patriotic audience. Those who have not been imprisoned will be bought off and appointed to positions in the presidential administration. There is currently an active adjustment of the positions of bloggers in various Telegram channels from the Russian segment, so that Putin's visit to bow to Trump and the future deal are covered in the way the Kremlin wants. Apparently, only one Alex Parker returns will remain in Telegram, who will honestly continue to write about the shame of Putin's misfortunes. This is a good test of patriotism right now. For some, it will prove to be genuine, while for others, it will be convenient for the presidential administration, i.e., fake and feigned. In times like these, the masks come off and it becomes clear who is who. That's Kirill Kachur. That's the whole thing. The only thing that they disagree with Putin is that they think Putin is not genocidal enough, and that they now believe, which is why I believe also firmly that Russia is going to collapse no matter what. It's just a matter of time, and I'm giving it all like about a year from now. Yeah, really, that's the latest period, August 2026, because they're all doomed. But meanwhile, these guys want to take over with their guns to build this Kvachikov's Russian Christian socialism. And all of it, in totality, is just insane and stupid, like Kremlin's regime in modern-day Russia. But that's a bigger story for another day. Currently, this story's over, and I'm mostly insane because, oh boy, this was difficult. And I need a drink. Or 10. Be a good heretic. In case of these Kvachikovs, that means. Or whatever. God listens to Slayer anyways. До свидания, товарищи. And remember, happiness is mandatory.
Thank you for listening to the Eastern Border Show. If you have any questions or comments, go to our website, theeasternborder.lv, and leave a comment there. Or email us at theeasternborder@gmail.com. We'll be sure to answer. You can also follow us on social media and contact us there. If you enjoyed this episode, then leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and tell your friends about us. It really helps us grow the show. And remember, happiness is mandatory.